little low. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here with us tonight. My name is Michelle Rosenbaum, and I am Vice Chair on the Steering Committee for the Oregon chapter of the National Museum for Women in the Arts, or as we affectionately call our nonprofit, NIMWA Oregon. That's quite a mouthful. I'm so grateful that we have the opportunity to co-sponsor this lecture by Lumi Tan for you tonight with Converge 45. NIMWA Oregon was founded 3 years ago by Elizabeth Leach, our chair, and we also have other founding members such as Marianne Deffenbaugh, who meet regularly to plan our events. Some of our events since this past fall are a lecture by Chris Timken titled The View from Here, Land, Art, and Historical Monuments. We also hosted artist studio visits and private tours at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum at PSU, the City of Possibility that featured the past, present, and future of architecture here in Portland, in a private art tour at the Soho House, and one of my personal favorites, a tour by Jordan Schnitzer for our members at his art collection warehouse. We also proudly launched a Portland Arts and Culture map that features the cultural corridor and beyond, which features 65 galleries, museums, and venues that show art throughout Portland. This is our gift to the vibrant arts and culture we have here in Portland. And we will soon be launching an interactive digital map and app to complement our beautiful printed map. While our organization does promote women in the arts through our participation nationally in the Women to Watch program, all of these activities align with our mission to promote and activate the arts throughout Portland and beyond. If you're interested in learning more about NIMWA Oregon, please sign our book. It's in the back table on your way out. It's just by the glass doors there. And please get a copy of our map, because we're very proud of it, and it's our gift to the city. I'm also honored to introduce Derek Franklin, the artistic director of Converge 45 since 2022. His work on Portland's citywide Triennial in 2024, titled Social Forms, Art as Global Citizenship, hosted over 60 artists at 17 different venues and attracted over 80,000 viewers to the city. His collaboration with Lumi Tan on the next iteration of Converge is exciting for NIMWA as we continue our mission of amplifying the wonderful arts and culture we have here in Portland. Please join me in welcoming Derek Franklin.
Thank you, Michelle, for the wonderful intro and telling us more about the Oregon chapter of the National Museum for Women in the Arts. That is a mouthful. I'd also like to thank NIMWA for sponsoring this event and Pacific Northwest College of Art for hosting it, and specifically Garrick and Minotti for helping bring it together. Also thank all of you for joining us tonight for this talk with the 2026 Converge 45 Citywide Triennial Curator, Lumi Tan. I would also like to thank all the artists, writers, poets, filmmakers, and other creatives for doing the work they do as cultural producers and making the world a more inspiring and thoughtful place. We need you more than ever. I'd also like to thank everyone who supports the work of those people through your generosity, whether it's financial, intellectual, physical, or just showing up to events like this. All of you are important to art and its ecosystem, and Converge 45 appreciates you for being there. It is an honor and a privilege for me to introduce many of you in Portland to Lumi Tan for the first time. Coming up, whoever was serious about contemporary art in the curatorial field kind of vied for these positions within New York and competed for internships at Artist Space, Sculpture Center, the Kitchen, or they applied to the Whitney ISP. It was at the Kitchen that I was lucky enough to meet Lumi, who took me on as the worst intern of all time in 2012. It was there that I learned a lot about what it means to be a curator that believes in art, artists, and their legacies first and foremost from Lumi Tan. And I also learned what hurricanes could do to New York as Sandy flooded the Kitchen that year. After leaving that internship, I never missed an exhibition at the Kitchen, and I would cross paths with Lumi through artists or other exhibitions, and have continued to follow and watch Lumi's work with amazement as she has become one of the most sought-after curators working today. Her sustained commitment to the Experimental Artist Project and giving emerging artists commissioned opportunities has shaped the art world we see today and shaped many artists' lives for the better. Throughout her career, Lumi Tan has remained beloved by artists, writers, and curators alike. Currently, Lumi Tan is an independent curator and writer based in New York. She most recently served as curatorial director of Luna Luna, the traveling art amusement park that originated in 1987 and reopened as an exhibition to much fanfare in Los Angeles in February of 2024, and is currently on view at the Shed in New York. She is also the editor-in-residence at Topical Cream magazine and the curator of Freeze Focus New York. Prior to Luna Luna, Tan spent more than a decade as the senior curator of the legendary contemporary art space, The Kitchen in New York. Where she produced numerous exhibitions and performances by artists such as Kevin Beasley, Sandra Perry, Annika Yee, and I found out today, Nadaki Sasamoto, among many others. She was awarded the Via Art Fund Curatorial Fellowship in 2020, which supports visionary curators worldwide. Earlier in her career, Tan was the guest curator at Fons Regional de Art Contemporarium Nord and a curatorial assistant at MoMA PS1. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Art Forum, and Freeze magazine, among many other publications. I hope you all join me in welcoming Lumi Tan to Portland in the talk tonight.
Thank you, Derek, for that incredibly kind introduction. Thank you, Michelle and Nimoy. Just learned that short abbreviation. So Nimoy, Oregon, for this opportunity to introduce myself to all of you. I've met a few of you in this room, and I look forward to meeting all of you after this. I want to make sure that there's time for Q&A at the end of my talk. So please don't be shy at the end. I'm going to give you a bunch of information now, so it'll be a lot to process. So my talk tonight will be an overview of a few projects that I curated at the Kitchen while I was a senior curator there from 2010 to 2022. And then I'll briefly talk about the recent large-scale commercial project I did called Luna Luna, and then end with some very brief insights into my thinking around the planning for Converge 45. And to give a short introduction to my background, following up on Derek's introduction. So I attended college for art history. I moved to New York City and became a curatorial assistant at MoMA PS1, which is a contemporary art space in an old public school building founded in 1976, which then became affiliated with MoMA in the year 2000. I then worked as a director at a commercial gallery in New York, which represented mostly emerging artists. And then I moved to France to work, as Derek tried valiantly to pronounce. Talk about a mouthful. It's the FRAC, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, in Dunkirk, France. And that is a state-run contemporary art collection. And then I started working at the Kitchen as a curatorial fellow, and then eventually became senior curator. So for me, it's become incredibly important to understand all these aspects of the cultural ecosystem and to understand the dependencies that are created through all these spaces and how artist support is defined differently in all those spaces. And I'm going to spend so much time during this talk on the kitchen, not only because I worked there for half of my career, but it also really changed the way that I approach curating and brought me into performance the first time. I did not work with performance before I started working at the kitchen. And without this influence of performance, I don't think I would have been able to do the shows that I did or take the risks of commissioning such ambitious projects. And I became really comfortable with not knowing how a project might turn out. And I leaned into a real trust of the process and trust of artists. But I also came to understand audiences in a completely new way. So I'll start with this hopefully brief overview of the kitchen's history. So the kitchen was opened in 1971 by two video artists, Stana and Woody Vasilka. And they were video artists who wanted a space for electronic media experimentation. Video art was a really nascent art practice at the time, and found a lot of commonalities with electronic musicians, experimental musicians who were using the same technology of synthesizers, modulators, these kind of analog technologies at the time. So it was called The Kitchen because it was in the kitchen of an existing art center in Soho, which was, as many of you know, an artist community in New York City, downtown New York City. And so this is the first space. So this was the kitchen of the Mercer Art Center. Here you can kind of see how it's already beginning to mix video, performance. You can see how the audience is situated. That's why I always really like to start with this photo. And then in 1973, that building actually burnt down. So the kitchen moved into a loft nearby. And it was kind of a typical loft in the neighborhood, you know, where artists lived and worked. So it became a very easy place for artists to kind of, you know, stop by, find community, invite their friends, to become artists and audience at the same time. And through that kind of loft space and that opening up of the kind of institution, it became more interdisciplinary, showing performance, exhibition, music, theater, and dance. So here, just a few examples. You see Joan Jonas's performance of the Juniper Tree in 1977, Vito Acconci's exhibition Acts of Emission, 1976, so just various ways that this loft space was used. And then this is a Beastie Boys performance from 1982. This is when they were still a hardcore band. And I always really like to use this image because it's so rare that you see how an audience was situated during these performances. And it's kind of amazing that they're just seated quietly in a bright space while watching this hardcore band. These other changes that happened were, you know, it went from this artist-run space by the Vasilkas to a director-run space with artists curating the program. And it became just a very rich and lively space for experimentation, for interdisciplinary, you know, risk-taking, and for building community. And it was particularly important for music movements like minimalism, free jazz, new music, experimental opera, created scenes of downtown dance, supported video making, not just exhibitions. And, you know, again, these roles of kind of audience, artist, curator, programmer, producer, documentary photographer, videographer, all were kind of mixed up together. And so in 1985, the kitchen moved to its current building in Chelsea, which is on the right here, which at the time was a neighborhood that was more focused on nightlife versus what it is now, which is really a neighborhood for contemporary art galleries. And the building really changed the program because instead of all of these different types of work in one single loft space, it became two black box theaters stacked on top of each other. So, you know, the program became a little bit more focused on performance, particularly dance, theater, and music, and less exhibition focused. But then in the early 2000s, the kitchen was kind of on the brink of closing because of lack of finances, and people felt like it was losing a certain relevance and kind of experimentation that it once had. And a curator from the Whitney Museum named Deborah Singer came in, became the director, and made several changes that really improved the kitchen's financial health and relevancy to a new generation. But she also created a museum structure within the kitchen, which it never had before. So she became a director and chief curator. She hired full-time curators for the first time, who were not just artists, but, you know, people who were kind of outside of that process of exhibition making and actually performing in the shows. And then also importantly, she turned the second floor theater into a gallery, mainly just by putting in white walls, but keeping the theater lighting and sound. So that enabled the kitchen to have a very distinct gallery that was really equipped for multimedia work, and then we could establish a regular exhibition program in addition to the theater programming. And so when I was hired in 2010, the kitchen was doing about 30 live programs a year. This is just a few examples of that. So you have Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's Originale from 2014, Maria Hasabi's dance performance premiere in 2013, Ralph Lemon, Scaffold Room in 2015. And alongside this was 5 to 6 exhibitions a year. So it was really an incredible amount of programming for 2 to 3 curators at a time. But the greatest opportunity for our team was that curators didn't have any distinctions about what areas to program. So even though I had never curated performances before being hired at the kitchen, I was not given any parameters about what I could or could not curate. So for me, it was just an incredible learning experience to come in and really just learn new vocabularies, ways of collaborating, and really learn from these artists who had been at the kitchen for so many years already, as well as bringing in new artists to the space. And I also became, for the first time, a producer in addition to a curator, which really changed the way I saw my role and allowed me to let go of a lot of curatorial ego and to really understand with artists where I was needed most. If they needed really curatorial advice, if they needed just kind of an advisor within the institution. For a lot of performers and theater makers, I was the first curator they had ever worked with. For a lot of people, they just really didn't understand what I did at all, and just saw me as a person to sell tickets, which I was perfectly happy to do. But another thing that distinguished kind of the programming at the kitchen was just we were, as I mentioned, I was learning from artists who had been there for such a long time, and really knew the institution and were trying to keep the legacy alive, but also that we acknowledged that these artists who had worked at the kitchen for a long time weren't looking to kind of move on from the kitchen as a relatively small nonprofit. They really saw the kitchen as a home that they could consistently return to, and even if they went to show at larger institutions, whether they were theaters or museums, they could always come back to the kitchen, experiment, do the thing they really wanted to do, and then go back out to a larger audience if they so desired. And so I'm just going to go through a few examples of how kind of this artist-centric way of working helped artists in different disciplines. And first, in a few ways that looked more like traditional performances or exhibitions. So this is a theater piece I did with Tina Satter, who is an incredible experimental director, and who I worked with. I think I did 3 evening-length performances before Tina came to me with this idea that was a really huge risk for her, which was to create a theater piece that was not written by her. She had written and directed every single work prior to this, but was really based off an existing script, and in this case was the verbatim transcript of the FBI interrogation of reality winner, who, as some of you may know, received the longest whistleblower sentence in American history for her role as in leaking. Sorry, this is a mouthful. Leaking the documents around Russia's interference in the 2016 election to The Intercept. And so Tina was so captivated by this transcript that she, again, just used it completely verbatim, worked with performers that she really trusted and had worked with for years, but that really brought out the kind of power dynamics within this interrogation. Like through the play, you realize, how, and this is so relevant to today's situation, of course, but how much the FBI kind of wielded this intimidating power over this woman who is incredibly accomplished, veteran working at the NSA, came to her house without a search warrant. You see the ways they coaxed her into admitting her, leaking of documents. But Tina specifically kind of worked with, trans actors, switching gender roles, to kind of draw out these power dynamics, and took out kind of all the other information. So there was no set. The lighting was really stark. The sound was really stark, just using electronic music, and just kind of like let the language and the performances do what they needed to do. And through this, there was so much attention brought to Reality's case. There was so much press and outreach to Reality when she was in jail. There was an enormous amount of growing support for her release, which didn't eventually happen. But I'm really proud of this particular project because it, started The Kitchen, which is a theater for 155 people, went to off-Broadway, went to Broadway, and then eventually became a feature film released by HBO a few years ago. And so this is just kind of an example of something that might take a traditional form of theater and kind of grew into this larger thing that affected more mainstream culture. And so then this is a view of the Kitchen's gallery. This is a show I did with Annika Yee called You Can Call Me F in 2015. And so, again, very relevant to our times, maybe more relevant in the COVID lockdown. But in 2015, it was the moment of intense paranoia around the transmission of Ebola into the United States. And if you were living in New York City, at least, there was just like a constant, daily update about like who was coming into New York, who came from treating Ebola, where they went, what bars they went to, if they went on the subway. So it was this really fear of contagion. And Annika was just starting her now kind of well-established work with bacteria. And she was working at MIT with a microbiologist named Tal Danino. And she decided that she wanted to take this kind of metaphor of contagion and paranoia around infectious disease to one of kind of fear of female networks. And so for this piece, as you can see on the left, she wanted to create a giant bacteria billboard, which is actually based on a viral marketing campaign, literally viral marketing campaign for the movie Contagion by Steven Soderbergh. But she made a super bacteria out of samples from her female networks. So people who worked in her studios, her collectors, her dealers, all the women at the kitchen, all her friends. So we collected swabs from all these people, brought them together into one super bacteria, working with Dr. Janino, and she used that as paint to create this bacteria that grew and died during the course of the exhibition. And this was the first thing that you saw when you walked into the gallery. And then the second thing, as you walked further into the gallery, was the set of quarantine tents, which each had their own, what we called sculptural ecosystem inside of it. So it took a lot of, both of these parts of the exhibition took an incredible amount of maintenance, cultivation, care from me, my interns. Derek was, long gone by then, but he would have done that. Our entire staff to kind of keep this exhibition alive. And another kind of much more subtle thing about this show, because, you saw this kind of giant petri dish when you came in, you felt like really overwhelmed by, let's say, disgust. And you thought you smelled something, but you were really kind of just feeling quite paranoid about seeing this growing bacteria. But the smell that was actually being pumped into the air was the scent of Gagosian Gallery, which is a blue chip gallery, as many of you know, that Annika had captured and replicated synthetically, working with another artist, kind of scientist named Sean Raspit. And we were pumping that into the air as a kind of mask of what you might think this super bacteria smelled like. But, you know, paradoxically, Gagosian Gallery doesn't smell like anything because, you know, it is a site of luxury, it's a site of commerce, it's a site of kind of like the West, you know, a place where you're supposed to feel very comfortable spending money, which is kind of outside of the realm of bodily functions and needs. So if you're wondering what Gagosian smell like, it really doesn't smell like anything. And then just two more examples of commissions by more emerging artists. So on the left, you see Mariam Benani's Siham and Hafida. So this Mariam Benani is a Moroccan video artist who works with AR and kind of this hybrid documentary, ethnographic film, music video style. And Siham and Hafida, she followed the relationship between two practitioners of a traditional Moroccan singing practice called shufa that was only performed by women, and so it was traditionally passed down by oral traditions. But Siham is kind of, who's not on the screen, Hafida's on the screen, but she interviewed these two practitioners, one which was a kind of senior practitioner who was very traditional, and then one who learned actually from YouTube, this practice from YouTube, which was, you know, this new kind of emerging way of learning this practice that felt quite threatening to older generations. And she set up this kind of faux reality TV show between the two of them where, you know, they meet for the first time, and Mariam kind of exaggerates the drama between the two of them, though I think that they are quite comfortable with each other now. And then on the right, an installation by Sandra Perry, who is an artist who I met, you know, in their last year of their MFA program, and really saw so much ambition and talent in their studio that I don't usually work with artists who are in the MFA programs, but knew that she would create something really spectacular if she came to the kitchen. And she created this work, Resident Evil, this installation, Resident Evil, which was kind of centered around the black body as a technology, as an evolving technology, one that can kind of resist colonial powers. And I always show this installation view and this kind of talk about this exhibition because it has been, the entire installation was purchased by MoMA, but you can still see the influence of this show and all of these kind of different works within the show in her practice, you know, now. So that's, you know, 7 years later. And all these works have been kind of like iterated and shown around the world. And, you know, it's a really, to me, just like poignant way of kind of showing how like the kitchen is an incubator for talent. It's still an incubator for talent, but also one where, you know, instead of like the artists kind of growing out of the institution, it's like the works too can kind of stay really close to the institution even as they travel the world and kind of take on new meaning. Oh, sorry, this image is catching up a little bit, but then I'll just show some examples of, you know, what I consider some like truly interdisciplinary works that we did. This is, there we go. I'll just talk over this video. So this is an example of, you know, an artist who was really internationally recognized when kind of they came into the kitchen. Jan Vo was already, you know, in every international group exhibition, had major representation by blue chip galleries, and I was very, very skeptical about what an artist like Jan Vo might do at the kitchen. So for this particular project, Jan decided to work, or to really center performance in his work for the first time, and kind of gave over the installation to the band Shushu, who is a a band that he had collaborated with on a public program, The Walker, prior to this presentation, but had never really fully collaborated with. And so Jan invited 2 gold pounders from Thailand from a workshop that made the gold leaf that Jan made sculptures with, and you can see them in the back of this video. And the way that they make gold leaf is to have this really rhythmic kind of pounding over 3 hours to make a single kind of cube of gold into flat gold leaves. And he found that kind of process, that movement and that sound so compelling that he kind of he just imagined how the band Shushu would interact with that. And so then gave Shushu kind of free rein to collaborate with these gold pounders and the sound. And so what Shushu decided to do was to work with all metal instruments. So you see there's cymbals, gongs, Tibetan singing bowls, and they wrote, I believe, 32 discrete compositions, 3-minute compositions that they chose by chance every day that the gallery was open. And they would play a composition until an alarm rang out, and then they would switch the compositions. And so some of these compositions range from, really, I would say, like, more as traditional as you can get, right? Like real musical scores of new music, let's say. And then other compositions were much more improvisational. They were things like throw a cymbal into the air and use a slingshot with a butterscotch candy to hit it for 3 minutes. And so this happened in the gallery every single day for 3 hours for 6 weeks. And it was a way of, kind of showing these different temporalities of the exhibition and the performance, but also different ways of working, right? So you had the labor of the gold pounders who were making the gold, and you had the labor of the band who was performing every day, and of course the gold pounders were also performing. And then by the end of this exhibition, the collaboration between the gold pounders and Shushu was also made very apparent. Like their rhythms were much more matched together. It would be that the gold pounders would take a break and work with the metal instruments. There was a lot of freedom and a lot of very little, I would say, like bureaucracy or liability that was happening in the gallery. And Jan really kind of Janvo really exited this exhibition. Like he kind of didn't know what was going to happen. All of this kind of really valuable artwork is being hung around the walls, which was a kind of insurance risk that we didn't worry too much about. But, there were times when there was no audience in the gallery, and the band was really performing for themselves and for the gold pounders. And metal instruments started to include folding chairs and folding tables. And, it really did show me what an established artist, the risks that an established artist, when they welcomed other collaborators, other ways of working into their practice, could do. And then another kind of version of this with a younger artist was a project I did with Kevin Beasley called Assembly. Kevin Beasley, as many of you might know, is a sculptor, sound artist, DJ, someone who, again, has experienced a lot of, I guess I would say, success at a relatively young age. And someone that, through their work with sculpture, performance, and sound, is a really great fit for the kitchen. But for many years, Kevin and I were in dialogue about when would be the right moment, because he was kind of getting all of these opportunities at larger institutions. I think, his galleries didn't think the kitchen was like such an important space compared to these other museums that were offering him shows. And so we ended up doing a project together the same year that Kevin had his first institutional show in New York at the Whitney Museum, which is right down the street from the kitchen. And so, we wanted to make a project that was very independent of his Whitney show and something that showed a very different part of his practice. And so for Assembly, we kind of worked together to kind of take his, I would say, like role as artist out of it as much as possible. And we, the kitchen was kind of entering a renovation phase, and the building was kind of beat up already as we were getting ready for a construction project. So I was like, Kevin, what would you do if you just got the entire building, all 3 floors of the kitchen, including the office? And so we decided to turn the entire building into a performance space. We programmed 2 weekends of performances, 1 on each floor. And so that the way it worked was an audience would come in, start at the 3rd floor, which is our offices, then go down to the 2nd floor, which is our gallery, and then onto the 1st floor, which was our theater. And of course, all of those spaces kind of lost their meaning during these kinds of projects. And we worked together also to figure out like all the things that he couldn't do at the Whitney, or the things that he couldn't change at the Whitney that he, really found, let's say, more frustrating, but also, like wanted to see how far he could kind of push an arts institution into the realm of, let's say, a club or a music venue. And so, we decided to make all the performances $5 for basically 1 day of performances, which was 3 hours of performances. We decided to make it, push it earlier in the day so it would be more family friendly. We offered free refreshments, like free snacks and drinks, so that people would feel comfortable staying for a few hours. And we just wanted people to kind of come in with the sense of unknowing, right? Like they knew who was part of the festival. Like we listed the names of who would be performing during Assembly, but we didn't say when they would be performing, so people would just kind of come in and have 3 completely different experiences in 1 day. So this is just an example. This may not have been on a single day, but at the top you see Logan Takahashi, who's an electronic musician and DJ, playing in our offices. You see Misa, who's the pop star alter ego of the video artist E. Jane, doing a performance in the gallery, and then Jason Moran, who's a jazz pianist, doing a performance in the theater. So all incredibly different experiences, all very different kind of audience, like ways of kind of audience positioning and behavior. Some are more like clubs, some more intimate. And audiences were really accepting of this. I think that we did manage to make everyone feel very comfortable, to make the artists feel like they could come in and kind of have the full access to our technical staff, to our curatorial staff, even in this kind of festival format. And I think all Kevin really wanted to do was kind of just create the situation in which other artists could participate. And so, I don't even think now, if you look like on the kitchen's archive or anything, Kevin's name is even mentioned necessarily. But this is something that I see that he is starting to kind of like replicate in his museum exhibitions as he invites more people in to perform, and kind of pushes institutions to take more risks in terms of how performances are presented, how audiences gather within them, and timing and all of these things, and kind of trying to make the museum into more of, let's say, a venue that more people feel comfortable attending. And then very briefly, I'll talk about this kind of transition that we did during COVID into an online residency, because to me, these were kind of the last sets of projects I did at the kitchen, and it was such an incredible challenge for me and for all the artists, because the kitchen is a performance space that really relies on people coming together into space. But the kitchen was also a space of production, a space for video making. So when the COVID lockdown started, I really wanted to push that kind of that history and put production into the forefront and make it really available to our audiences. And the first artist who was supposed to be kind of in residency during the COVID lockdown was Autumn Knight, who I'm sure many of you know through her performances at PICA, her performances and exhibitions at PICA. She's an incredible, incredible artist. And having Autumn be the first artist that I worked with during the COVID lockdown was so important, not just to me to prove that we could do really ambitious work during COVID, but to all the artists that followed. Because I'll just put on this video link so you can see. Because, Autumn is someone who, as many of you probably know, is really dependent on audiences and audience engagement and kind of physically engaging with the audience, improvising with the audience. And so I was really unsure of someone like Autumn would even want to do something online. But Autumn was so kind of desperate to perform by that point. This was in June 2020. That she was like, of course, like whenever, we'll figure it out. Let's just, I just want to be performing again. And so what we devised, so this was like pre-vaccine. We really didn't know very much about protocols. So again, I was like, Autumn, why don't you just take the kitchen, like take the whole building, and kind of use it as your site of performance. And what we ended up doing was just working with the smallest possible team. So one lighting person, one sound person, and then a very small camera crew. And Autumn worked very hard to devise kind of a system where all of these people could improvise alongside of her and do these incredibly ambitious live streams. I thought if you saw at the beginning, this live stream is over 2.5 hours long. And we did these every week for 4 weeks. One of them wasn't live streamed, but we live streamed the entire thing. It was live edited. The sound was live edited. All the video mixing was done live. And her performances were completely improvised. And every week she took a floor of the kitchen and just kind of, messed with it, essentially. And the kind of the overarching thread, and theme between all of these performances was she was really inspired by The Wiz. This is actually I've done 3 projects now inspired by The Wiz, so there's definitely something in the air. But for Autumn specifically, it was about the performance space as machinery, right? And her as the Wiz that is operating all this machinery from, this position where she looks like she's in power, but really she's just like Richard Pryor in a robe at the end of it. And we found, various ways for audience engagement to happen by the end. So all of this is still archived online. But by the end, you could call in and talk to her. It was like the Wiz hotline. But, for me, what was so fascinating as like a curator that had insight to the process was just that, there was the performance that was like happening in front of me for 3 hours. And then there was the performance that was happening, on the live stream, which was all being live edited. And then, of course, there's like the separate performance that's like being documented by a photographer, all these kind of temporalities happening at one time. But in the end, like all of this was pulled off so like seamlessly, I would say, that everyone thought that these were completely scripted, planned, plotted out, when in reality, everything was completely improvised. And this has now become a really common way for her to work. And she's actually continued to keep working with the same film crew, editor. She just did a performance at the Walker with the same crew. So it was really incredible to see how, just this huge risk for her became something that she's now incorporated into her non-COVID live performance. And I do encourage you to watch these videos if you have 9 hours. So after, and I know we're running kind of late on time, and I do want to make time for Q&A, but after I was at the kitchen for 12 years, and I absolutely, I'm so grateful for the kitchen, for the community that it's cultivated, that continues to cultivate, and for what it brought to, my own, how it pushed me to be just a much better curator, and to really believe in experimentation. But one thing that I was starting to feel at the end of this 12 years was just that I wasn't really talking to anyone outside of the kitchen's community, and I was really struggling with that. Like, I was feeling like I was losing the ability to talk to people who weren't just, in this building with me constantly, that was, part of our audience, about art. And I wanted to, kind of see what it was like to work in a more mainstream, or, work with a bigger public. So I fell into this opportunity of working with Luna Luna. And so for those of you who don't know what Luna Luna is, or was, Luna Luna was the world's first art amusement park, and it was founded by a Viennese artist named Andre Heller in 1987. And Andre Heller was this really special cultural figure. So he was extremely well known in Vienna, in Austria and Germany. He started out as like a DJ, then became kind of a pop star and a poet, and like through this, kind of appeared on a lot of television variety shows, and then through this, kind of used this notoriety and acclaim to start making these large-scale art spectacles. So he was, doing large-scale fireworks shows over the Reichstag, and this was happening in like 1985. So it was really quite a statement that he was making work that people in East Berlin as well as West Berlin could see. Or he made these giant inflatable sculptures that toured the world. But for him, this idea of Luna Luna, the idea of an artist-designed amusement park, was something that he was quite obsessed with and worked on for a decade. And the way he puts it, because he himself is a real myth maker, is that, he grew up in the shadow of World War II in bombed out gray Vienna. The Ferris wheel at the Prater amusement park was this really meaningful symbol to him of a kind of lost childhood. And so he wanted to kind of reclaim this childhood, work with many of his peers in Austria and in Germany whose, families had been persecuted, murdered by the Nazis, had also had their kind of childhoods taken away, and create this fantastical amusement park together. And so the first artist that he invited into this process was Sonia Delaunay. She was the oldest artist. She died by the time Luna Luna opened. But, he kind of went to like the biggest artists first. So Sonia Delaunay agreed to make this entrance archway. Salvador Dali agreed to participate. So then from, Dali, he went to Basquiat, to Jean-Michel Basquiat, to Keith Haring, to Roy Lichtenstein, to David Hockney, and all of these people participated in Luna Luna, and it was a functional amusement park, with 33 rides and attractions that happened in Hamburg, Germany in 1987. And so it happened for one summer. This is another view of performers at the original. It happened for one summer. It was supposed to be and it was supposed to go on a world tour after it closed in 1987. It was extremely successful in Hamburg, despite it raining almost every single day. And hundreds of thousands of people attended. But, Andre had really big dreams for it. He wanted to tour Asia. He wanted to go to the UN. But in the end, what ended up happening was that it entered into a decades-long litigation, because of battles and ownership between Andre, the city of Vienna, and an American foundation named the Birch Foundation. And so in the end, this American foundation lost this case and had to take possession of the park. They had initiated the sale, wanted to bring it to San Diego. All the plans kind of fell apart, and so that's why they sued to kind of get out of the sale. But in the end, they had to take the entire park into their possession, 44 shipping containers, and they didn't really have any plans for it. So they just parked it in their storage in rural Texas. And this was in the early 90s. And so it just kind of sat there. No one really knew about it. Even though hundreds of thousands of people had attended, there was a catalog that was produced. All these incredibly famous artists were involved. And then in 2021, basically, there were two sets of people that kind of rediscovered it. So one was an art lawyer working in LA, who heard from a German curator that there was a Basquiat Ferris wheel hidden in the Texas desert. And then in New York, there was a creative director who read about it on a blog because someone had found the original catalog, scanned the images, put it on their blog, and one of his staff members had found it. And this creative director became so obsessed with Luna Luna that he just cold emailed Andre Heller being like, can we build a new amusement park? Not even, where is this amusement park? But like, can we build a new one? I'm so obsessed with this idea. So these two different parties came together. The main issue was to get it out of litigation, or to get it back from this foundation, get it out of litigation, buy it back from this foundation, find the proper investor. The investor they found was the rapper Drake. So yeah, there are many twists and turns to this story. And so a company was created to, once Drake bought this entire collection of 44 shipping containers, sight unseen. So this was another condition of the sale, is that they had to buy the 44 shipping containers without opening them. So when the company bought them, they didn't know what was inside, if the park would be inside at all. But they brought it all to a studio in LA. They opened the crates, and miraculously, the entire park was in the crates. Most of it was in excellent condition. So they started this company to reassemble, conserve, and exhibit the original works. And so I became the curatorial director of this company, which was, a huge shift for me. But what we ended up doing was to create this exhibition, this large-scale exhibition of about half of the works. And it opened in Los Angeles in the beginning of 2020, well, at the end of 2023, actually, but really open to the public early 2024. This is the Keith Haring Carousel. As you can see, it's in amazing condition. This is one of my favorite works in the entire Luna Luna Park. But this was such a, distinct challenge, right? So it's, are these extremely valuable artworks? Are they old amusement park rides? Who are we creating an exhibition like this for? This company is not an arts institution. It's really meant for a public that would never go to a gallery or a museum, and is really more likely to go to something like Immersive Van Gogh or Meow Wolf, except that you can't actually do anything at this amusement park, right? So it's like it's setting people up for a lot of disappointment in that way. You can't ride the rides because they are now priceless artworks. So for the curatorial team, it was this really unique challenge because, well, we had this incredible collection that had never hadn't been seen in decades, that went through this very intense process of conservation and reassembly by an incredible studio team that had no assembly manuals, really built all of this work from archival photographs, and just like their own sheer dedication and talent. we had to do that. We had to do all the original research on the works. Some of the artists, like Keith Haring, are incredibly well known. Some were, lesser, let's say, much lesser known in America, very well known in Europe. Some were not known in really either place anymore. So it was this kind of, like an actual opportunity to write art history in this way, but then also just to make this art history really interesting to a mass audience. And one of the ways we did this, like, for example, like we wrote didactics without any art speak, for example, and we made this incredibly popular timeline. This is just one tiny part of this timeline, but we started at the birth of Sonia Delaunay, the oldest artist, in the exhibition in Luna Luna, until Luna Luna opened in 1987. So, that's 2 centuries of information. And we kind of wove together the history of, these individual artists that were in Luna Luna, the history of World War II, the history of amusement parks, the history of interest in astronomy and like moons, the rise of like the art spectacle, the rise, the creation of avant-garde art in the post-war era. So we did this we just tried to make all this information as accessible as possible. And this timeline was something that we heard so much about. Audiences really loved seeing the integration of all these different histories, and actually just learning about World War II. We were like, wait, people don't know that there was a divided Germany. People don't know really what these artists were reacting to, when they were making this actually very experimental, challenging work for an amusement park. And I just want to give a shout out to Lindsay Westbrook, who's a copy editor who is here, who did all the copy editing for Luna Luna, and if anyone is looking for a copy editor, she is the best. The best. This would not have happened without her. And then these are just a few more examples of what was in the show, but this is Salvador Dali's Dali Dome. Salvador Dali had made one of the kind of first fun houses, essentially, a surrealist fun house for the 1939 World's Fair in New York called the Dream of Venus. And so that was a reason why he was so interested in the amusement park as this kind of format for experimental art. And then, I've talked a lot about the kind of disappointment of like what you can't go into, what you can't ride. You could go into the Dali Dome, but you could also get married at Andre Heller's wedding chapel. So Andre Heller himself had 2 works in Luna Luna, and one was this wedding chapel where, the statement was that you can get married to anyone or anything that you desire. So this was a really radical statement in 1987, right? So we have this incredible documentation of, same-sex couples getting married. You have, family members getting married. You have people marrying objects. You have it's this very kind of joyful, celebratory artwork that, still really resonated today. So we had these, we had performers being wedding officiants, and then you got a Polaroid of your ceremony, you got a wedding certificate, and just like in the original, if you needed to get divorced, you would just rip up the certificate. And, we did hear from people at the original Luna Luna that they did this on their first date, they still had their wedding certificates. And so all of those kind of oral histories were part of this process as well. Okay, so this was a lot of information, but once this LA exhibition closed, I moved on from Luna Luna, and I think a lot of people think Luna Luna was kind of this fluke in my career, but for me, working outside the art world, I learned so much about, again, speaking to people who don't share common, let's say, contemporary art vernacular, contemporary art language, both inside inside the company. I really had to explain what an exhibition was, what a curator does, how artists work, kind of just starting from zero within the company, and then also working to be able to communicate to this larger public, in an exhibition format. So for me, kind of learning how to do all of that, as well as having this chance to show, this, again, very experimental kind of radical work from 1987 that had this very accessible presentation format, in the end, shared a lot more with my experience at the kitchen than I thought it might. And so after this exhibition ended, I moved on from Luna Luna. As Derek mentioned, it actually just closed in New York at the Shed. I wasn't as involved with that presentation, but I understood that like my role there was kind of over and done with. But I was very lucky in that as this closed, Derek and Converge came calling and offered me this opportunity. And so, there are many reasons why this opportunity of working with Converge was really appealing to me. One was working in Portland, which I didn't have, let's say, that much experience with, but I knew Derek really well, a lot of trust in Derek, and I had worked a lot, particularly with the curators at PICA. I kind of knew this kind of cultural landscape here was like very ambitious, even if, let's say, it was on a smaller scale than New York, that people were really collaborative. And I just wanted that new challenge of kind of working in a city that wasn't my home city, that wasn't a place that I felt really comfortable, that I kind of knew the ins and out of. And I think thinking of that within, these models of these regional biennials and triennials that are often kind of criticized for the fact that they are temporary and that someone does kind of drop in and, let's say, maybe not make like a lasting effects on the cultural ecology. Like, to me, I saw that I wanted to reverse that thinking and really wanted to think of that as the benefit of, how temporary communities kind of come together in times of crisis and really form like new ways of knowledge, or new ways of like creating knowledge, of sharing knowledge, of ingenuity, and what can really come out of, thinking through like impermanence as our current way of living, right? Like, I think we've all experienced this currently, but just, this transitional nature of our realities is like, it's just constant at this point. So, what can we learn from embracing that instead of trying to kind of hold on to everything? So I guess that's as much as I can really say about my plans for Converge at this point. But, something that I've heard a lot during these kind of, these initial meetings with artists and spaces, and everyone has been so incredibly generous with their time here and letting me kind of, come in with dumb questions and introducing myself, is just this a greater desire for dialogue with artists outside of the region. And so that's something that I do really want to center in the process and strengthen those relationships and make sure that, the temporary communities that are formed through this iteration of Converge are not just for people outside of Portland, but it's really focused on what Portland needs. Trying to predict what Portland might need in August 2026. So thank you, and I'll open it up for questions. And Derek has a mic.
I have a mic, so if anybody has questions, just get my attention.
And it can be about anything. But if you're also feeling shy, you can just come up to me later too, if no one wants to ask questions in public. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.